Welcome, everyone. I'm Shanna Peachy Bushhart, the denominational minister for Faith Formation for Mennonite Church USA. My colleague, Caleb Gingrich from the MCUSA Communications team is our Zoom host, and I'm grateful to him for helping today. What a joy it is to see you all gathered here to talk about celebrating Advent at home. Advent is such a child-friendly celebration, with its emphasis on anticipation, which every child understands, and its ritual of lighting candles, which most children just love. And Advent gives us a distinctly Christian approach to the Christmas season, at a time when the emphasis could so easily be only on shopping or decorating or running from one event to another, well, in normal times. Advent offers an opportunity to slow down, to focus on the story of God's love in the birth of Jesus, to light candles together, to tell stories of love and peace, and to wait for Christmas. That's why we offer the Advent at Home worship guide. And in the spring, there will be Lent at Home as well. This year, we have a new writer for the guide, Talashia Keim Yoder, who is here with us today to give us tips on how to use it. Talashia is a pastor at College Mennonite Church in Goshen, Indiana. She's a theater director at Bethlehem Christian Schools, a seminary student, a spouse to fellow pastor Daniel, and a parent to 2 elementary-aged children. She's also the writer behind GodStoryGodSong.com and the writer behind BuildingFaithFamily.com, and I encourage you to check those two websites out. Resourcing families to nurture faith development at home is one of Talashia's passions, and we are fortunate that she gets to try out her ideas at College Mennonite. And I'm so pleased that she's willing to share her ideas with all of us as well. So, Talashia, thank you so much for being here with us today to share your ideas and your encouragement for doing Advent at home.
Thank you, Shanna. And it's good to see all of you here. It feels strange to only see some of your faces and not all of them, but I also realize it's super awkward to watch yourself on camera for an entire meeting. So do what you need to do. But if you could all quickly show me your faces for just a moment, because I want to ask you to use your hands to help me read the temperature of the room here. So I'm going to ask you on a scale of 1 to 5 to show me how comfortable you are with celebrating Advent at home. This is going to help me kind of know where to take the conversation. So if 1 is like, what is Advent? And 5 is, I could probably lead a workshop on celebrating Advent at home. All right, ready, set, go. Okay, this is really helpful. Thank you. So in general, that's like a lot of 3s to 5s. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining what Advent is because I think we've got that. So we'll continue on with more about like how to use the resource. A resource can kind of look overwhelming when we first lay eyes on it. And no matter how much we try to make everything laid out so it makes lots of sense, when you get that thing in front of you, it can feel like, well, what in the world do I do with this? And that is why we are doing this workshop. So if you hear nothing else today, hear this. Doing anything to celebrate Advent at home is a win. And choose to do what you can sustain for the whole 4 weeks of Advent plus a couple weeks of Christmas season. I'm looking to see here, Nat and Lisa Jordan, are you on? I had asked them to share just a little bit about their experiences, but I don't think they are here. So I will go ahead and share what I was going to ask them to tell you about. They're a family from the congregation where Lisa just entered the waiting room, so we'll let Lisa talk. Hi, Lisa. You're just in time. Guess what? It's time for you to share. Welcome. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about your first experience with celebrating Advent at home, Lisa?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Well, Talashia asked me to share because the first year I tried Advent with my kids, I felt really inspired. My kids were really small. I was really excited. There were so many good ideas, and I took on way too much. So by the time we met the next Sunday, I was like, well, I tried everything, and it didn't go very well. So I learned to start small and just choose one or two things. There's so many good ideas. So yeah, that was my lesson that I learned the hard way.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yes.
So just a note from a fellow parent, bite off what you can chew. And if you are, I see that there are definitely some pastors and Sunday school teachers on here, encourage the families that you relate with to do what they can to really bite off what they can chew, and to like give themselves one little challenge, one thing that feels like it stretches just a little bit. There are kind of three parts to this resource. There's the daily ritual and the weekly ritual and the expecting ritual. We're going to workshop the daily and weekly rituals and talk just a little bit about the expecting rituals. So first, we'll talk weekly ritual. And as I talk, please type any thoughts or questions or ideas that come to you into the chat. You can just do that as it's sparked, and at the end of kind of this section, Shanna will moderate a little bit of a conversation for us based on that. For the weekly ritual, find a regular time that you'll be able to do a weekly ritual each week. One of the things that is really helpful for anything with faith formation, whether it's Advent or daily prayers or whatever it is to have kind of a rhythm to it. So if the children you're working with know that at this time on this day, we're going to do our longer ritual, and at this time every day, we're going to do the daily ritual, they kind of are ready for that, and it becomes part of their rhythm and really gives some comfort and something to look forward to. This weekly ritual is the long part. That's why we only do it once a week. In our family, so my 7 and 10-year-old, this part would take like 30 to 60 minutes, depending on how much we get into it and how inspired we are. Because honestly, some weeks we're not very inspired and some weeks we're very inspired. It may seem like a long time to think of 30 to 60 minutes, or if you have really little ones, it'll probably be less than that. But really do consider making this part of your weekly rhythm for the next several weeks. There really is something about doing like a longer form that helps us come home in a different way. It's common to feel intimidated by the idea of opening the Bible and reading it with our children. So this is kind of something I see over and over with parents, and it's because we feel like unequipped. Like, what if our kids ask questions that we don't know the answers to? Or I don't know enough about the Bible myself. How am I supposed to lead my children in reading it? Take that pressure off of yourself. You are exploring Scripture together. You do not need to know a single thing beyond what your children know. And you can take this resource and do a bunch of preparation for your time together, or you can just say, it's time, pick up the resource and have at it. Take that pressure of being the teacher off of yourself. You can approach it as teacher, but you don't have to. This resource is not meant to set you up as the expert or the teacher. It's supposed to just allow you and the children in your life to read the Bible together and explore it together. So maybe you'll decide that you're beginning your week with this weekly ritual. And we're just going to pretend this is what we're doing on a Sunday afternoon, the first week of Advent. We're going to try week 1 together and see what we think. So I would probably not pick up the resource. I would probably go to it online electronically, my downloaded copy, because that's how we tend to roll, and begin with telling the story. Maybe you want to tell the story your own way, or maybe you want to read it straight out of the resource. If you have littler ones, maybe you want to simplify some of the language. If you have bigger ones, maybe you want to pause for conversation. And you could skip the story in its bigger context that we have here, but it is really interesting to see how the familiar story takes on new meaning when it's put into context. So this thing of putting the story into its bigger context is a practice borrowed from This Is the Story, which is housed on the God Story, God Song website. Yeah, putting it into the big picture kind of puts a new spin on why Jesus was even needed, why a Messiah was needed. So I'm just going to read this straight from the resource as we workshop this. God created a good world. We were created to live peacefully, but we often miss the mark. When that happens, we have to deal with the consequences. But God sticks with us. Our whole story is the story of God sticking with us. In the Bible, God called a family to be a blessing to the earth. And even when Abraham and Sarah and all their descendants missed the mark, God stuck with them. When their Egyptian rulers missed the mark and made them slaves, they cried out to God, and God stuck with them by sending Moses to lead them. The people of God had a hard time understanding how to live out God's law in community. So God sent leaders like Joshua and judges like Deborah, prophets like Samuel to bring the people back to God. Eventually, the people missed the mark so much that their land was taken over by invading armies. Many of the people were captured and put into exile, and others were left in the ruins of what had been their home. And it's right in the middle of all of this stuff with being put in exile and captured and all of that, that this week's scripture is written. The writers of Isaiah lived and prophesied during that time. So the first people who heard these words that we're going to read today were people who felt like their lives had been completely flipped upside down. They couldn't do anything the way that they were used to doing it. They couldn't go and worship in the temple. Things were never going to go back to normal, and they didn't know what was ahead for them. Does this sound familiar? Yeah, these words of the prophet brought comfort to the people in that time. They kind of bring comfort to us now. The prophet reminded them that God is very, very, very big, and God sticks with us. We read these words now in Advent because we know that the glory of God that the prophet talks about is revealed in Jesus. These words are about getting ready in hope of the Messiah, the light of the world, breaking in. So now we're going to read Isaiah 40. And if you open up to Isaiah 40, you'll see that it is an extremely long chapter. My children are used to reading huge chunks of the Bible at a time, but even they would struggle with something quite this long in one sitting. So I think we would in our family say, we're going to read a couple verses every night. So maybe the first time we would start with the first 5 verses. Comfort, oh comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term. Her penalty is paid. that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice cries out, "In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all the people shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." So that's the first 5 verses. Maybe we just read that, and then we would talk about it. There are some prompts there for helping you talk about it. Now, if my children were 1 and 4, I'd go, let's read this, and then we're going to say, the people are sad, and God is bringing them hope. And that's all. But then we parents would probably, after they're in bed, come back to it and look at the prompts, because it's interesting and it helps us grow in our faith. If my children were 2 and 4, maybe we'd make a game out of being hills and valleys and being made flat. If my children were 5 and 8, well, they'd be learning about maps in school. So maybe we would look at the topographical map prompt and really dig into that. Or if my kids were 10 and 12, we would probably just read all of the prompts and see what sparks our imagination. If we read one and it was like crickets, we'd move on to the next one. So that's the talk about it section. Just dig into it a little bit more. And then tell it your way. So if your household is already using this as the story, just continue your family project. But if you haven't been doing that, I really encourage you to have some kind of a project during Advent. Working on something together where we try to bring the scripture to life or do something with it can really help it stick. So the idea in the resource is to do some kind of like a mural or collage of some kind, like visual art that brings us through Advent and into Christmas and all the way to Epiphany. So maybe you're going to use the words and kind of illustrate the words, or and the words meaning like hope is the word for the first week, peace is the word for the second week, etc. Or maybe you're going to get out some magazines and cut out pictures that make you think of hope, or colors that are hopeful to you. Or maybe you really get going on that mountains and plains thing and you want to collage that this week. Or maybe everyone draws their version of this week's story and eventually you have a mural of all the stories of Advent. So that's your weekly ritual, a little workshopped version of it. We'll pause right now. Shanna, you can go ahead and moderate if there's anything that has come in.
We don't have questions yet, but if anyone has questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat now. I really love the idea of having that family project that you work on from week to week. And the one that's recommended in this one is the Journey to Bethlehem. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Journey to Bethlehem mural that is recommended in the material?
Sure. So that's kind of what I just described, of something that can be done really any way that you would like to do it, whether that is more of a collage or more of an illustration, but something that I think like a huge piece of paper that gets loaded with illustrations or collages throughout Advent and Christmas that like takes up a place of prominence in your home. Often in Christmas time, our homes are really full of Christmas decorations. And what happens if something like this is one of those?
Yeah, it's a great idea. I think it's a great way to, have something in the home that the children really take ownership in, and it's always there. They see it's a work in progress, and and they're always contributing to it. And I think that it gives kids, that sense of, this is ours as their, it's something we do together to celebrate. We don't have any questions in the
Great.
chat.
Let's continue on then. Now we're going to talk about the weekly ritual. That was the weekly ritual. Let's talk about the daily ritual. And just to note that you may, when you do your weekly ritual, you may want to fit it into the daily ritual, like light the candles and then read the story and talk about it, or you may want to do it separately. Some people like to do their Advent ritual like around supper at the table. Some like to do it first thing in the morning. Our family does it right before bed in the living room, and then we like sing our way to bed. So choose a time of day that you usually are all together, which as our kids get older is harder and harder and harder. But try to find a time of day that you can really be consistent with. And this is also where you may want to choose an expecting ritual. So there's a whole list of those in the resource of ideas. These are just little ways to kind of embody or enact the getting closer and closer to Christmas thing. Like moving Mary and Jesus closer to the manger every day. That's one that, especially when our kids were younger, they really got into, but now they still really need to do it every day. Advent calendars also work well for this. We have a family in our church that always makes a paper chain for Advent. Last year, my children made a paper chain, and Daniel and I didn't even realize they had done it until we were like in the second week of Advent, and they like hung it up in their room, and we're doing it every day. So these little ways of just doing something daily that physically brings us closer to Christmas can really be a value. Another thing that I suggest in there is reading the story from the book of Luke every night, which is like a lot, but there's something really magical about saying those words every night. My younger son was 3 when he had it memorized, and it's just a cool first story to have written on their hearts like that. Again, if there are thoughts or questions or ideas that come up for you, please put those in the chats. All right, so for this ritual, we would light the candle, and I have my candles here. And I would light one for you, but I can't find a lighter in the entire church. So we're not lighting the candle today. But say this is night 2 of week 1. So we would light our candle, and as we lit it, we would say, Jesus brings hope. Or you could say, Jesus is hope. And then we would maybe read a few more verses from Isaiah 40. And then we would do our expecting ritual. So maybe you open your Advent calendar window for the day or something like that. And then we would pray together. God, we look around and we see so much pain. We need hope. We long for hope. The prophets told us that hope comes from you. God of hope, live in us today. Amen. And then we would sing a song. You might be a singing family who wants to do that. We like to sing, He Came Down in the hymnal. We tend to sing God Came Down. And we use the Advent word. So like for the first week of Advent, we will sing, God came down that we may have hope. God came down that we may have hope. God came down that we may have hope. Hallelujah forevermore. And then our children would fight over who gets to blow out the candle. And we would do that, and we'd go to bed. So that's an example of a daily ritual. And I've asked Sarah and Seth here to share a little bit about what their family has done in the past and what they might do this year.
Hi, everyone. It's just me. It's Sarah Yoder. We attend College Mennonite Church. And Talashia, I was trying to remember how many years now it started in our Sunday school class where you gave us some ideas. Do you know how many years ago that was?
I think, I mean, was it when Elliot and Zeph were babies, like 7 years ago?
I think too. I was thinking it was at least 5 years.
Yeah.
And so this has been something that Talashia has circled back to every year, often at our request, because we realize that each year our kids are growing and maybe we can introduce more. When we started, I think that maybe I had a 2-year-old and an infant. Maybe they were 1 and 3. And when we started, we just did the candles. We always put our candles on our table where we eat our meals. I have really found that the more things that I keep visible, the more likely I am to do it. If it is right there on the table, I see it every time I walk by the table and it reminds me. I actually just put the extra leaf in the table so that we could leave the Advent candles on there and not have to move them when we added food to it. So when they were little, we lit the candle and we said hope. And there's something magical about those candles. I see someone asked a question, are there any tips for warming children up to the joy of this? And it's so interesting to me. I mean, my kids are 9, 7, and 5 now, and the candles are magical. Lighting the candles are magical. And they're old enough now that we take turns lighting them as well as blowing them out. And we helped Talashia with something. We recorded something for next week. And when I told my kids that it actually wasn't Advent yet, they were like super bummed that it's not Advent yet. And so I really think something as simple as putting your candles somewhere and lighting them weekly is magical and beautiful, and it does draw kids in. So we started with just lighting the candles and saying those words, hope, joy, peace. The next year, I think we tried to make it a little bit more complicated. We said, God brings us joy, or Jesus brings us joy. Several years ago, we took Talashia's idea of, we set up our little figurines for our nativity over at the end of the shelf away from the manger and the stable, and then each day we kind of moved them closer, and that became a very special thing. We started putting little baby Jesus in our, like the top of our little daily thing, so that when we got to Christmas, we took Jesus out of the top and added Jesus to the nativity scene. Maybe a year after that, I printed out Luke 2, and again, I kept it by my candles, because if it was by my candles and we were sitting down to eat, we would read it. I found that meal times are really good times. Kids, we're there, we're sitting, there aren't distractions, they can eat if they want to, but you have a pretty captive audience at your table. What we started doing was, after we'd read through Luke 2 a couple of times, I started like pausing, so in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that, and pausing, and the kids started filling in the words. And that was a helpful way that we started to memorize it. But again, I printed it out, it's on our table, it's there. We don't do that daily, but I would say it happens a couple times a week. And like Talashia said, fairly little ones will become memorized very quickly. And what a beautiful thing to have memorized, right? And so we added that story. A year ago, my parents bought this book for me. It's called 25 Days to Jesus. And that was another thing we added at bedtime. It's a children's Advent devotional that goes through some of the different characters in the story. So, there's the story of Isaiah, and then there's the story of Abraham as the father of all the people, and Luke tells a story, and Gabriel comes, and just really beautiful short stories that we started doing before bed during kind of our reading time. And so that was something we added to. This year our family has been doing the God story, God song, and I just really anticipate this is going to fit in nicely. I think we'll do the things that we normally do, but we'll add in that weekly time of reading the story for the week and learning a new part to the song that tells us the big story of God's people and God. And I just think it's going to tie in really nicely. I think sometimes as parents or educators, we kind of feel like we're banging our heads against the wall. Like, we're doing all this stuff, and is it making a difference? Is it making an impact? And I have had those moments where I'm like, why are we doing this? Nobody listened. Nobody seemed to care. Like, and then you have these really beautiful times where you see that it does matter. You know, a couple years ago up at Children's Time, my kids were the ones that were shouting out the words to what the candles mean, and I'm like, okay, they're learning something. Or, you know, I'm banging my head against the wall because we tried to get through the weekly story and nobody seemed to care, and then I hear my kids singing the song down the hallway by themselves. And so I think, you know, in the same way that we work and work and work to help kids learn to ride a bike, or the same way that we put the time in to play catch out in the yard or to hit tennis balls with them, these are skills that we teach too, where sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't, but putting the time in is really important. And I have found that my children love Advent and I love Advent, and that way more than I did before we started doing this. So I just really encourage you, start small, and then as you have successes, add to it and continue to help it grow. But I really do think it pays off. So good luck, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. And this is recorded, so the pastors in the room, if you need like a little encouragement for helping families in your church be motivated to try this, just play in what Sarah said. She's not a pastor, and so her telling people to go for it really goes a long way. All right, I see that we've had some questions here. So I'm trying to look through these just a little bit. And yeah, Shanna answered the question about the script and narrative. That's right there in the resource. And it's very similar to what you would find in This Is the Story. Like Sarah said, the candles really help draw people into kind of the wonder of Advent. When my son was 2, we were in IKEA and he started yelling Advent. And this is around Easter time. And Daniel and I were like, what is going on with him? And then we realized that we were in the candle section and he was like surrounded with Advent. And he was so happy to see all of the Advent around. And there was just this wonder. But what's funny is that now at the age of 10, he still has that sense of wonder when we light a candle. We started having candlelit dinners now because it calms everybody down. So, you know, regular supper time, light a candle and everyone's happy. But there's something about that just kind of centers us, I think. Or you might have one like my younger son, and half of the time it's magical and half of the time you're trying to get him to not play with the fire. So there's that too. Other ways to help children, or I think older kids might be a little harder sometimes to draw into this if they haven't done it before. But I think part of it is coming alongside instead of teaching. So we'll say, hey, we're going to explore this together. There are some prompts here that we can read. Hey, do you want to read the whole like big story so we can think about that? Doing this alongside each other instead of, now I am going to teach you these things, because I know my kids would like drop their defenses really quickly if I approached it that way with them. They have enough of me being their pastor. They don't want me to be their teacher too. So yeah, coming alongside, especially with the older ones. Yeah, another person, Marianne, is saying no trouble in engaging the the lighting of the Advent candles. Yeah, and another resource there. Thank you for that. And another good point from Shanna. Yeah, children don't have to sit still for this. I tend to love it if my kids do sit still, you know, because they're never still. But it's just really true that if they are dancing around the Advent candles, as long as they are not falling into the fire, it's okay. And like Sarah said, if you're around a table, it's a little easier to keep people all focused in one spot. Okay, and a logistical question. Does a taper candle that's lit every night last until Christmas? So here I have, these are the candles that we use every year. Our church gives these out to all the families in our church, or to all the people in a church, I should say. They're just regular taper candles, and they're not even high quality. They do last, but that first week's candle is very short by the time we get to Christmas. And that's part of the fun, like watching them all get shorter, because the shorter they are, the closer you are to Christmas. So yeah, we've definitely just used the taper candles. For the Christ candle in the center, we actually use the Christ candle from our wedding. I know a lot of people just get a white taper or a white pillar candle. We use the same one every year because you only light it for like 2 weeks. So, Marianne has sometimes burned the hope taper to the bottom before Christmas. Yeah, okay. So it can happen. And I would see, like, if you're doing this around a meal, that would take a little longer and you're more likely to burn out. Battery operated candles can be really helpful, especially with the little ones. There's a little less wonder in a battery operated candle, but they're way safer. And if it's like a safety hazard, definitely go with the batteries. And kids still love those. It's a light source, right? Shanna, is there anything else you're seeing in the comments that you want to bring out? I'm really attempting to read those and talk at the same time here.
No, I don't see anything else. I think you've done a nice job of finding all the questions there. I do want to just talk a little bit about, this idea of, small children especially are wiggly, and there really isn't a good reason to have them have to sit still. It's really going to work better for the whole family. And I'm speaking as one who, when my children were little, I thought they had to sit still too. But as I get older, I realize that I was just that was just pointless. If you have a small table that you could put wherever that everyone in your family could stand around to light the candles and do your short candle ritual, that might be easier on your children than having them sit to do it, and that would be easier on you too. So you can just be a little more creative and child friendly in the way you do it. Meet them halfway.
And there are ways to let them be doing things while, our younger son last year would play with his wooden nativity set while we did our Advent ritual. And it was a way to be doing something, and he really engaged a whole lot better when he was doing that than when he was trying to sit still. So he usually ends up either snuggled on one of our laps or playing with his nativity set. So it still feels like he's engaged. Play-Doh would be another option. And yeah, sometimes the sheep were fighting with each other or things like that were happening. But the big picture, it all still worked.
Nice. I like Play-Doh. Play-Doh works really well. Some kids would enjoy having just, something to draw while you were talking. So yeah, those things would all help. Yeah, thank you for your questions, everyone. I wonder if people would like to share a little bit about what they're looking forward to and some of the things that have worked for your families as you have celebrated Advent together in the past. It would be fun to hear those things. You can put those in the chat too. Talashia, were you going to talk a little bit about the expecting ritual?
Sure. I did a little bit when I talked about the daily ritual.
Yeah.
So like Sarah said about moving the figures closer into the manger. Yeah. And again, you don't have to do that, but man, it sure does make a difference. It kind of enacts the story a little bit more each time. I'll also say things are different in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, we all know that, right? I mean, we've been in this thing for, is it 9 months? It's a long time. It feels like 9 months. I don't know if it is. But a lot of the ways that we've experienced Advent have been through our churches. And I know we're still doing Advent at church, right? And we're finding our ways to plug it in, but we are more dependent than ever on faith formation at home. As a pastor, that kind of excites me because this is where I think it happens best. The church is a support and an equiper for that faith formation to happen at home. And there are things that we can learn and develop in community that we can't do on our own, for sure. But when things are happening at home, then what we do at church is so much more effective and takes on so much more life. So those who are pastors or who are leaders in helping things happen in churches, one encouragement I would have would be to try to have some consistency between what's happening in church and what's happening more publicly in your congregation, however you're doing worship right now. I know our church live streams all of our services. I know a lot of churches are doing Zoom church. But if there's some connection. So for example, Sarah talked about their family doing a little ritual for this week's worship service. We're having a family each week videotape themselves lighting the candle or candles and saying, Jesus brings, and then whatever those words are for those candles. So Jesus brings hope, Jesus brings peace. And then we show that as part of our worship service. And after we've shown that video, we go to a camera shot of our church's Advent wreath lit with that same candle or those same candles. Again, it's just like one other way to tie it together. So anything that we could do right now for consistency is really huge. It helps all of us feel supported, I think.
Mm-hmm. So connection between home and church. Yeah. What's happening at home and what's happening at church. Yeah, absolutely.
And if your church isn't doing things like that, but you're a parent who's working with this, help your kid draw the connections. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, they just lit a candle at church. We do that at home too, don't we? Hey, let's light our candles right now while we are part of this worship service. Yeah.
Nice. Yes, we do have, I was just about to say, we will be releasing a Lent at Home worship guide in January. That will start on February 17. Subscribe to our newsletter called Piecemeal so that you don't miss it when it comes out. And Caleb just put the link in the chat so that you can subscribe to Piecemeal. And thank you, Caleb, for your help with the Zoom. And thank you to you, Talashia, for this great workshop.
Sure, and I'll say there are a couple of questions in here about things leading up to Lent and Easter. We can certainly do another webinar workshop like this for the Lent and Easter materials, if that's helpful for people. I think
Yes.
most of us are less sure of how to celebrate Lent than we are about how to celebrate Easter. I mean, Christmas and Advent. So we can certainly do this again if it's been helpful.
So true. Absolutely. I agree. I agree. Well, as we close our time together, I want to leave everyone with a blessing. As you enter the Advent season, may you and the children in your life together enjoy a season of expectant hope. May you sense the arms of a loving God enfolding you in care. May the joy of Mary flow over, around, and through you all. May the peace of the Christ child be with you. Amen. Take care, everyone.